Ms. Mohammed, good morning and thank you very much for coming through.
Good morning, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Now, this report is going to be announced, it's going to be launched today, but without giving away too much, it's coming up just less than about 2 weeks or so before the elections. Was that a deliberate decision by Amnesty International to release it now?
Yes, definitely. I mean, you know, for us, we've been monitoring the human rights situation in the country for the past 25 years. And, you know, it's basically our way of saying to the government, you know, it's highlighting things that they've done well. So, for example, you know, access to education has been great. In 2002, we had, you know, something like 40%, and now we have 90% of children who have access to basic education. But I think there's a lot that has not gone well. And in this manifesto, we are basically outlining what we think the state needs to do in order to change the situation that South Africans are facing.
So should we expect that in the manifesto you'll be telling us where human rights are being violated?
Yes.
What kind of human rights are being violated?
So we've basically broken it down. We've broken it down to the right to health. We've broken it down to climate change. I mean, for example, I just watched your video, you know, talking about what's happening in the country. You know, we outline exactly what South Africa should be doing because, you know, climate change is not a new thing. And actually, it's now arrived on our doorstep with a big bang. And if we don't take it seriously, you know, this is going to be a recurrence every year where people are going to lose lives, where children are going to die, where property is going to be damaged.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard views of other commentators, not just human rights activists, people like economists who are saying, and analysts and climatologists, and saying, as a country, as a society, when you plan whatever for your future, you have to factor in the unpredictability of the impact of climate change in your planning.
Well, you know, we've seen extreme weather conditions, and it's not just South Africa. I mean, let's be honest, we have seen, I mean, the visuals that we have seen coming from around the world.
Well, just Cyclone Idai the other day in Mozambique.
Exactly.
Now Cyclone Kenneth might be making landfall in northern Mozambique and southern Tanzania tomorrow.
And you know what we're saying to the South African government is that you've got to stop doing the things that you're doing. So fossil fuel, for example, coal, you've got to stop it. And you can't use the argument of jobs. You've got to find another way because, you know, if the situation gets worse and worse, there's, you know, the extreme temperatures is another big one.
Yeah. Well, another area that has been of concern, of course, which I think you might have highlighted in your manifesto, you can tell me. If not, it's about children's rights in this country because the level of abuse, you know, of our children, and then, of course, women, is appalling to say the least.
Look, I mean, we don't work too much on children's rights, but we have looked at rights of women. And abuse against women, and you know, South Africa's got one of the highest rates in the world. And you know, for us, I mean, we can see that President Ramaphosa has taken a few positive steps, you know, in reinstating things that had been dismantled before, like the child courts and, you know, the committee that'll the squad that'll investigate violence against women or violence of any way. But you know, unfortunately, we're living in a country where it's just dangerous for women and children.
Ms. Mohammed, just before I get criticized of focusing on the negative, you said there are some good aspects that you're highlighting. You've mentioned education as one of them in terms of access to education. Any other?
Well, look, I mean, I think that, you know, we also have a section in our manifesto where we look at South Africa's foreign policy and what they've been doing abroad. And we know for a fact that South Africa has played a positive role in many areas. So LGBTI rights is one of them. Recently, South Africa you know, played a big role in a resolution on Myanmar. And so South Africa has played a role. And this is important. Why? Because the world is becoming a much more complicated place. That, you know, spaces are closing, shrinking spaces. You know, you've got former allies like India who are now, you know, becoming more right-wing. And so South Africa is being much more seen as an important player in the international space.
And by the way, we're such a connected society now, in a smaller society, that on climate change, for example, an El Nino effect, which is in the southern part of the world, will affect food production, which will affect exports to Europe and elsewhere. So Europe gets to suffer as well. So it's not like it's nothing to do with me. Now, what about other rights, like freedom of expression? Do you look at those?
Well, you know, what we've seen is that those rights are shrinking. So you look at attacks on journalists, for example. Look at the way politicians have been attacking journalists. So human rights defenders, the media, you know, we feel that they're under threat. And, you know, this is despite the fact that we have a strong constitution to protect them. But you know, when you see the way in which journalists get treated by the so-called leaders, it's worrying. It's worrying.
Yeah, before I let you go, Ms. Mohammed, the Human Rights Commission of South Africa, when we last spoke to them here, they always talk about the high levels of intolerance, of racism, particularly on social media platforms, where many faceless cowards go on and say all kinds of horrible things against any kind of race when they feel like it. How are we doing? I mean, is the manifesto going to be sharing those kind of concerns as a society 25 years into our democracy?
Well, Amnesty globally recently did a study where it analyzed Twitter. And basically, you know, what we found is that women in particular get really attacked and, you know, sort of demonized, and, you know, so so particularly Twitter and social media is not a positive space. And I think, you know, what's happening, you know, in our world today is that there is so much information, there's so many platforms, and people are using these to bash other people. So, you know, all in all, I think that we're moving into a much more complicated space. And, you know, and what we're calling on leaders in this country, opposition parties, and, you know, whoever comes into power, to stop making promises they're not going to keep, to basically stop pulling the wool over people's eyes, stop telling them that you've built 5 million houses when you haven't. You know, be honest, and then start to build upwards, because, you know, election promises continue to happen and people continue to be disappointed, and it's not fair.
Because after all, in the real world, you can't have a laundry list of promises. You can have priorities, one or two, and focus on them and deliver on them. By the way, I've said this on this program that for me, Twitter particularly is a cesspool of toxicity, and we need to be careful about how we engage. Thank you very much, Ms. Mohammed. What time is the launch?
10 o'clock this morning at our offices at 97 Oxford Road. Anybody's welcome to attend, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. That's Shenila Mohammed from Amnesty International.